I guess we're at session 6 now, right? Is that right? I'm on lesson 5, but that didn't, I don't think that included Norman's lesson that he shared with us. So I think we're at about week 6, 2 more weeks after this. So thanks for being here. Thanks for sticking it out. A couple of quick reminders. Looks like everybody grabbed a name tag, so that's good. I'm going to pass around the attendance list, and I don't know what happened, but the week that I wasn't here, the first attendance list evaporated. And I have no idea where it went. The school was not in session, so I can't even blame the school. But so if you remember whether you were here or not, if you could help us out by filling in the rest of it, that would be good. And then as people come in, pass that around to them as well. And I think I'll leave the other housekeeping things for when the others arrive. But maybe I'll start us out with a word of prayer, and then I'll turn it over to Rob. So, Heavenly Father, we do thank you so much for this day. I thank you for just the beautiful weather, the opportunity to enjoy your creation. And Lord, I thank you so much for this group of men and women who are committed to communicating your truth with clarity, with accuracy, in an engaging and compelling way. And Lord, I just pray for each of them as they grow as teachers and you use them in different contexts. I pray that you would guide them by your Spirit, that you would use their efforts. And Lord, we thank you that ultimately it's you who transform lives by your Spirit and through your word. And so we just thank you for the opportunity to be involved in that process. We pray all these things in your name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, Rob needs no introduction, but I gave him a name tag anyway and decided to put his full name on there. But Rob wears many hats around Calvary and has for a long time, most notably his storytelling hat. And so Rob is here to share a little bit with us this morning. And I think you'll kind of be in line with what we're going to talk about during our main lesson. So give a warm Calvary welcome to Robert Strauss! Wow.
All right. How do I turn that off? Please, thank you. Yes. All right. Eric asked me to start off the creative teaching session. I guess this is supposed to be an expert teacher. That's not me. I'll share my ignorance with you, and we'll go from there. So we're talking about creative teaching methods. What are the first 5 words of the Bible? God is a creator, right? So when we're talking about creative methods, it really stems from the fact that we have a creator that is creative, and he created everything out of nothing. When we don't create stuff as much as we recreate stuff. And so one of the things I want to the creator. When you are teaching, when I started teaching, I had no idea what that was doing. So, and I didn't go to Bible school, I didn't go to seminary. Seminary came to me. But when you're asked to preach a sermon for the first time, and you don't know what the heck you're doing, you try to say, oh, what am I supposed to do? So you kind of look at everybody else, and for me, it was like, how does this guy do it? And you just try to learn it. And what I came to realize in doing this was know yourself. So when we talk about creative methods, they stem from you. Who are you? How has God gifted you? And all of us are different. We all have different experiences. We all have different personalities. We all do this. And so just briefly, I want to encourage you just to be yourself when you employ creative methods. Because sometimes I've seen people try to do creative things that do not come from within themselves. And you kind of look at it and you say, that's kind of a stretch. So I want to encourage you, number one, just to be yourself. And one of the things that I came to realize about myself, because I tutelaged under a guy named Lennox Palin. And Lennox and I had totally different personalities. He was hard charging. He was very organized. He could see 10 years down the road and plan stuff. And I'm not a planner. I'm a kind of a bigger picture guy, but details aren't that important to me. And so I remember I was really proud of myself because I had planned an event for like 6 months down the road, and I put it on the schedule in the church and all that. And I came in, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm so proud of this. And then right after I'm there, Lennox comes in and he hands the receptionist 5 years down the road, he has planned a Bible conference. With the dates and all that stuff. And I just think of the Bible. Right? It's not, so I just want to encourage you to be yourself. And I thought I would give you an example of one of my creative things that I do. And this stems from the fact that I was asked to do the storytelling for KZ Street. And I've talked most of my life to teenagers, all that stuff, and it scared me because I didn't know how I'm going to talk to little kids. I didn't know what to do. And so all of a sudden I came up with a storytelling hat. So that's my gig. Mm-hmm. But it has helped me to be very creative because I always know how I'm going to start something. I'm going to put something in my hat, and it's going to be related to the story. And kind of the weirder associate for me, I'm kind of weird. Weird thoughts come to my mind very quickly. The weirder connection is, it's almost more powerful. So I'm just going to do a storytelling hat. I looked and I keep all my stuff in my storytelling hat bag. So I'm going to do this just to illustrate. And I had to speak on the meaning of Christmas. It was Christmas, and that was the thing. What in tarnation was in my storytelling hat? Whoa, well looky. It's a Q-tip. I know what this means. This is all about Christmas. I bet you're wondering how I know it's about Christmas. Well, you know what when I was born with a giant innie. My belly button was so far in, I used to lose stuff in it. Yeah. One time I was looking and I found 15 cents in there, and I was so happy I found 15 cents. But it gets so dirty, I had to clean it out. So my mom would take a Q-tip. And she'd get down in and make sure it's clean as it could be. I was so happy. And he said, what does that have to do with Christmas? Well, let me tell you something. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to remember it, and so you never forget. God has a belly button. And now say it with me. God has a belly button. Can you believe it? So that's how I started. And now when you go home, you tell your parents God has. Now what is that? It talks about the incarnation, right? God came to this world as the God-man in human flesh. That's just a creative way to say what the incarnation is. But to me, when the creative way to say it almost sticks with you more, especially with a kid. But it's going to stick with you, right? Because what makes everybody on this earth has a belly button, right? So that's just an example. Number one, though, is know yourself. Don't do something that's out of your your experience, your mentality, all all that kind of stuff. So, but I am very grateful for this because if I didn't have the storytelling hat, I don't think I would want to teach in the children, because it's like, where do you start? For me, it just gives me a platform to go all over the place, and the weirder is almost the better. So anyway, that's my little tidbit.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you, Rob. I love it. I love especially that principle of recognizing who you are, how God has wired you to be creative is so valuable, because when you try to put on someone else's thing, and it's okay if you get an inspiration from someone else and say, oh, I could do a variation on that or do something like that would be congruent with who you are. But we've all seen something that it's not a fit, you know, or someone's trying and it doesn't work out well. It also, the flip side to that is that we can sometimes look at others and think, okay, well, Rob can do the storytelling hat. I can't do a storytelling hat, and so I can't do a creative method. And that's also not true, because there are creative methodologies that could be congruent with who you are, that doesn't require putting on a hat and having a goofy voice and stuff like that. So, but it's a great introduction to, let me make one other comment before we move on from what Rob shared. The other comment that I have is that, like, as soon as he started putting on that hat and pulling out the Q-tip, it was like everybody's attention. Now, you're all adults, you know, but all of your attention was riveted, and just like he said, you are going to remember. And I think that's the sort of hidden principle, is that, you know, we think about kids and we think, or even youth, and think, you know, that's the place for creativity. And the thing is, with kids and youth, you almost have to have that, otherwise you visibly lose that. With adults, we are great at hiding it when somebody has lost us. You know, we can be half smiling, nodding, and be in a totally different place, you know? And so you don't have to be creative with adults, because they will fake it well enough. But if we're looking for engagement and life change, that creativity puts an incredible tool in your toolbox to bring things to life. And so don't underestimate the value and importance of a creative method with adults. So that's our main focus today, is creative methods. I want to step back and review a little bit, but any other thoughts as we kind of just wrap up what Rob shared with us? Okay, very good. Two quick things before we jump into it. First of all, thank you to Stacy for bringing the trees today. Certainly appreciate that. Make sure you feel free to get up if you are eyeing those cookies like I am, and grab something or on your way out. Also, I want to pass this around now because I don't want to forget about it, but we talked a little bit last time, which of course was 2 weeks ago, that we are trying to put together like a practice teaching sort of format. And unfortunately, I don't have all the details yet. I do know that Norman Fox and Josiah Rocky are going to be involved in it. I will be involved in it as much as I can, depending on my schedule. But I'm preaching some over the next few months, and so that impacts my availability. What we're looking at is either like doing something in August, where those who sign up each have the opportunity to teach a short lesson, 15 minutes, half hour, something like that, to a group of us, and get some feedback and kind of test things out, or doing it in November, December. If we did it in November, December, there'd be an opportunity for a little bit longer time period, and probably have the opportunity to do 2 shorter lessons, so you can try it out, get some input, and then do it again, And it would be probably not like sort of prime time. It's like we probably wouldn't promote it as an equipping class, but we would do it as sort of a teaching practicum right in this room, and so, or maybe not in this room, but in one of these rooms, but as a follow-up to this class. So if that's something that's interesting to you, signing up does not commit you to anything, but it puts you on the list so that once we start emailing folks about it, you'll be included and have the opportunity to say, yeah, that's something I'm interested in. So if you have not already, if the more you hear about it, the less you like it and you're already on here, feel free to scratch your name off. But if it's something that's of interest to you, by all means put your name on. And if there's any additional comments that you have, even as I've just shared a little bit of the 2 time frames we're looking at, August or November, December, you certainly can write a comment on that as well. So I'll pass that around if that's of interest to you, and we'll get more details out before too long. Now, I also am going to pass out this handout because last time I had this beautiful handout and totally forgot to pass it out. Wait, it's only printed. Okay. There may not be enough for everyone. I think our printer ran out of something, paper or something. And so I tried to print 30, and I think I got like 10. So I apologize if you didn't get one, if you don't care to take notes or you have a note paper. There's not too much on it today. So if you have another piece of paper, then feel free to use your own. So, as we jump into things today, I want to take a little time to review where we were last time. Because we covered a lot of material. So in the process, we've been working through this process of preparing a lesson. So we talked about selecting the text. We talked through kind of some of the principles there. Analyzing the text. This is you're studying it thoroughly. You don't have to master the text. Like any teacher, any preacher often feels like, hey, I could spend more time studying the text. We want to do a good and thorough job, but don't feel like you have to have a doctorate degree in that text before you can teach it. That's where we're relying on the Holy Spirit. Summarizing the text, or summarizing. What did we talk about with summarizing? What was that about? Summarizing what, for instance? Benjamin.
Is that the big idea concept?
Yes. Yeah. So, and there were a couple parts, or a couple different forms of the big idea. Do you remember the big idea of what? Do you remember what we were talking about? Because I shared that there are kind of 2 parts to the big idea. Well, that could be a confusing question. Yes, Benjamin?
I just looked at my notes.
Totally.
All right.
Go for it.
The complement and subject.
Right. So, there's the subject and the complement, right? In fact, they're right over here. What is the subject? Like, what is the passage about? And what is the complement? What does it say about what it's about? So, and I won't spend too much time digging back into the details on that, other than to say, it's basically there's the big idea of the text. What is the main thing that the author is seeking to communicate? And then that translates through to what is the big idea that you are seeking to teach. So Paul may have had a big idea that he was trying to communicate to the Colossians. And so then what's the version of that you would be trying to communicate to your women's ministry group, or your equipping class, or your small group, or whatever that context is. So there's kind of a textual big idea and a teaching big idea. So that's kind of what the summarize was out. And then we talked last time about organization. And I said that there's a 3-fold focus, and I asked you the unfair question of which of these is the most important. And what do we say? Which is the most important?
All 3.
All 3, that's right. Because they form an interdependent progression. That's kind of technical language. But we're saying that we want to spend time in the biblical text. Like, if we don't spend time looking at that specific material that God is communicating, we run the risk of teaching our own pet topics or perspectives. We lose the authority, because now it's just me saying, hey, this is what I think you should believe. The authority comes from the biblical text. Then we talk about the theological. Now, as I was reviewing my stuff this morning, I thought I'm going to ask a question to push us a little deeper on that. When I talk about theological in our teaching, what do you think I'm talking about? What's encompassed in this idea of our teaching should be biblical, theological, and practical? What am I really saying? What am I talking about? Yes, Doug?
I don't think you're talking about systematic theology. I think you're talking about what does the text say about God, or how God interacts with man, or what does it say about man overall, or how he interacts with God, or sin, or one of the main theological points, but not an actual systematic theology.
Right, yes, you hit the nail on the head. That sometimes when we hear the word theological, we instantly go to systematic theology or something like that, that, oh, I need to, what Eric's saying is that this needs to be a theological topic. And that's not necessarily what I'm saying. Certainly there are times where it might be a topic of systematic theology. But what we're looking at when I talk about theological is truths about God, truths about his plan and his purposes, truths about us, humanity, truths about the world that are theological in nature. So they are theological principles. What does this text say about God, about us, about our relationship with him? So what are the theological principles? Again, the lesson doesn't have to unpack a whole category of systematic theology, but as you study the text, it reveals theological principles or even a specific overarching theological principle. In fact, you could probably exchange that word theological for principle and you'd get the same idea. But we want to use the word theological because these aren't just principles to live by. These are principles that are rooted in truth that we get from God. So that's, as you're mining the biblical text, you want to be looking for what are the theological principles that are coming to the surface, because that is what you want to be communicating. And in a lot of ways, it's the theological principles that came first. And then they were applied in the biblical time, the biblical context. So the biblical is that theological principle, that truth about God applied in their time. And the practical is that same theological principle applied in our time. So how should that theological principle shape the way that we live in as specific of ways as possible? We will talk more about application either later today if we have enough time or next week as well. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. But we want to be hitting all three of these. Different lessons are going to have different, spend more time or more focus on one or the other, but we want to hit on all of these, and we want the students, the learners, to see that. We want them to see that we're not just stating a principle, but that's a principle that came from God's Word. They understand how we can see that in the text. They understand what that principle is, and then they understand how should it be lived out. So as you think about organizing the lesson, these ought to be in your mind. Then I gave you kind of a model of how to put together a lesson, how to organize it. Oops, there's kind of another way of looking at this. That the biblical text, the big idea or theological principle is applied in their context, and it's the funnel in which you get to the application. So then I talked about organization, and I gave you, do you remember the model? You don't have to follow the model, but all the parts of the model rhyme with rook. Do you remember what they were?
Yeah. Hook.
Hook, look. Book, took.
Look, took.
Right. Hook, book, look, took. So, hook. What's hook?
Getting interest.
What?
Getting interest.
Yep. Engaging people, getting interest. I mentioned a couple things. There's more than this, but the main ideas are you're trying to establish a connection between you and the learners, between the, and then raising the need means you're engaging the need that the lesson addresses. You want to raise that need so that there's a felt need that the text and principle addresses. Partially because you're trying to answer the question, like, so what? Why should I listen to this? No adults are going to say that to you. Maybe if you're in youth ministry. But no adults are going to say that to you. But if they don't have a sense of need to listen to you, you're only going to half engage them. But if you can raise that sense of, yes, I've had that problem, I've struggled with that, I want to know the answer to it. I want to know what I should do in that situation. People are going to be much more engaged, and almost you want them to be almost looking for the answer. Now that's not always easy to do. Sometimes it's easier than other times, but that's one of the things that you're trying to do in that hook. So the next one is book. What's book?
Into the text.
Yeah. getting into the text, you're looking at a lot of those, the biblical and the theological. That's where you explore the text, you explain what needs to be explained. Usually there's a story arc of some kind. There's certainly in a narrative, but even if there's not a narrative, there is still a story arc. So you tell the story, explore the text, explore the big idea. So you draw it out so that it can be clearly communicated, clearly seen and communicated, and you explore how it addresses the need that you raised here. Then look and took. What are look and took? They kind of overlap, that's why I said it. I'll just put them up there. So look and took, I kind of think of this as, well, it's, again, we're kind of moving into that application type of stage of the lesson. Like what does it look like to live this principle out? And even you're looking into that principle a little bit more. You're explaining it. What does it mean? You're proving it. It's like, okay, you said that that's true. I'm not sure if I buy it. I'm not sure if that's actually what the text says. So you may need to spend some time doing that. And then apply it. How does it look when we live out that principle? And then finally, took is we want to take it home. You know, what's the take home and how specifically can we live it out? So any questions or thoughts on that as we... Okay, a little bit. I want to spend a little bit more time on review on that because we just covered a lot of ground last time we were together. So, good. Well, up to this point, we have talked a lot about, if you remember this diagram, we talked at the beginning about the teacher. We talked about who the teacher is and how that impacts the message and the teaching. Now we've spent a lot of time talking about the message, how we study the text, how we communicate it, how we organize the lesson. But at the end of the day, if we just focus on these two, we haven't gotten very far because we're teaching not to have great messages, but so that the students, the learners, can be impacted. And that's really where the methodology, the creative methods come in, because we're not just teaching material, we're teaching students. We're teaching learners. And so it's important to think about how to communicate that material so that it ultimately can move toward life change. And the truth is that what's sort of the default teaching method?
Lecture.
Write down information, lecture, yeah. Just sort of this downloading content. Now there are some good, lecture gets a bad name, there are some good things about lecture. Lecture is great for covering the most material. You can cover the most material with lecture style, which is oftentimes why it is most often used. It's also the easiest to prepare in a lot of ways, because you've done your study and so then you just share what's studying. It also gives you the best opportunity as the teacher who has spent the most time studying that text to share the insights that you found, right? So in a discussion, it's much harder to share all the great things that you've learned. So there are some good things, and that's why we're not eliminating lecture entirely. But we want to complement it with some other methodologies. Howard Hendricks says, the way people learn determines how you teach. Howard Hendricks wrote this book again. I'm going to put another plug in for this book. It's available in the church library. Teaching to Change Lives. Creative elements can enhance your teaching in significant ways. To communicate clearly, to stimulate thinking, to engage learners, and facilitate this learning process. So the rest of our time today, we're going to focus on different types of creative methods. Yes, Chris?
You know, it is, I completely agree with being very creative in your teaching. I think one of the things that, as anyone who kind of actually enjoys teaching and that kind of thing, I think you have to be very, very mindful that your focus is in the right place and not on the creativity and how much can I get people to laugh and how much can I, right? That the creativity is a tool to open the heart and to open the mind and to facilitate the application of God's word, and not, you know, because I've been in sermons that just seem more like a comedy show than than a scriptural message, right? So,
Right.
anyway,
Yeah, you want to make sure that the creativity, the creative methods are serving the teaching, serving the communication process, and not necessarily just elevating the teacher, right? You know. So yeah, great insight. So let's talk a little bit about this. Creative methods. What are some examples? And I want us to think broadly because it's not all like hyper creative. That's probably not the right term, but you know, it's all not all like storytelling hat stuff. Like you don't have to be a master storytelling hat person to be creative. So what are some examples of creative methods that we might use in our teaching to engage learners? And again, think of those like even simple types of creative things. Yes, Walt.
Well, breaking into groups for little discussions among themselves.
Mm-hmm. Right, yeah, small groups. Just go ahead and shout them out so that I can write.
Mnemonic devices.
Okay? Talk about that a little bit more.
Like when you gave us the hook, book, look, took.
Mm-hmm.
Or I've seen other people doing like gestures, like you remember things like enmeshing your goals and
Yep.
saving yourself, things like that.
Yep, yep.
visual aids.
Mm-hmm. Yep, visual aids.
Modern metaphors, so taking what the idea was and then doing it in a modern setting. Does that make sense?
Say that one more time.
Like a modern metaphor.
Okay. Can you give an example?
Like taking a historical idea or something, but then translating it into modern times. Or one time I was teaching just about how we are made in the image of God and how we allow ourselves to be used for things that are less than, and that would be like taking a really fancy teapot and filling it with gas and filling
Sure.
it, like
Yep.
use,
Yep.
like translate the idea
Yep.
into a different
Mhm.
concept
Yeah,
that really has them look at it anyway.
yeah, yeah. Love it. If I have any, I'm not a, spelling is not my spiritual gift. So if I spell anything wrong, just tell me.
Judgment free zone. Does anyone else touch mine?
Yeah.
And
So I think you link it to what's going on in the modern world.
Okay, so like kind of current
So like
events.
headlines or
Yep.
trends or
Yep.
how it isn't much different than what Israel went through 4,000 years ago.
Yep.
Kind of going along.
Benjamin?
Yeah, going off what he just said, I agree with that so much, to bring it into how to take this biblical principle and bring it into faith to where how do we handle certain things that are happening in our time right now that is, oh wow, that's really beneficial.
Yep. Good.
I was just gonna say, like, in the same vein, like using stories or illustrations, like sermon illustrations. You know, something common, like you tell a story about Star Wars, or you know, and then you link it back in something that everyone's familiar with, and then you link it back into the point that you're trying to make. It's in a creative way.
Yeah,
Sure.
Movies, books,
Cultural
stuff.
touch points always
Yeah.
connect
Yep.
with the bigger
Yep.
audience.
Things that will maybe actually elicit a little bit of emotion. I taught an adult fellowship a number of years ago, and half the class, at the start of the class, before I didn't say anything, I just handed out Hershey's Kisses to the right half of the class,
Sure.
and totally ignored
Yeah.
the left half of the class. And of course, that became one of the focuses, right? But so half the class felt just a little bit slighted, you know.
Yeah.
And then so now we have this kind of emotional connection to what we're going to talk about.
Yep. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because emotion is one of those things at a church like Calvary, I think we're a little, we can be a little cautious about emotions. Because we don't want to, rightly so, we don't want to be manipulative in our emotion or have people respond in a purely emotional way. And yet God has made us people that are cognitive, we're social, we are emotional, and we're even called to worship God with our emotions. Like our emotions are part of that experience. And I love how you described the example that you used because you were able to raise this emotion. It wasn't about getting an emotional response, but you used that to activate engagement in what you were talking about by eliciting an emotional response. And that's an important part of creative methods, is you want to there is a great value in eliciting an emotional response, not for the sake of getting an emotional response, but engaging the full person in that process. That's great. Thanks, Chris.
Sort of springing off of what Chris said is being the devil's advocate, I guess you could call it, where you're anticipating the other side of the argument and raising that question.
Yep. I think I'll call that tension.
Good.
Because you're kind of raising that little bit of internal turbulence, like you're pushing back on something that maybe we've assumed is.
You could do that without even actually saying anything, right? So one week I dressed as essentially a biker. I had, boots and chains all over the place, and I had a fake earring, and I walked to center class just like that, And so it's something that confronts someone's kind of internal bias without saying a word.
Yep. How many of you want to start attending Chris's teachings? Sounds really interesting. Chris's kissing. I like it. These are great examples. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so let's the follow-up question then is we've got all these methods, and there are more. We could probably keep going with this. I love what we've talked about here. But what are the benefits? We have been talking about this, but let's pull it out a little bit more. What are the benefits of using these creative? What do they do for us? What do they accomplish?
Well, you get the hook.
Mm-hmm.
You get the hook, but you also, as Rob pointed out, get the take home. You get the plant of memory, you get the plant of visual that they may not necessarily realize until maybe 3-4 months and they're like, oh.
Yeah,
that's what Rob's
belly button. Yeah, and I like how you mentioned that there are different points in the lesson that you may want to use creative methods, and they accomplish different things. Like if it's at the beginning, it may be an engagement piece, but there's also a place in terms of moving toward application or making it memorable. That it's important as you think about your creative methods to think, how is this functioning? Like, what am I wanting to accomplish as a result of using that methodology? Erin?
Well, psychologically, you can't put new information into your brain if you don't have a place to hold it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a framework or a history or an experience that accepts the information you're hearing, you won't be able to hold on to it. And so as a teacher, you kind of offer, here is a storage container, something you can relate to, an experience you can build in the classroom to hold on to this information I'm also giving you.
Sure, yep. Yeah, I've also heard it I like that metaphor of the storage container. I've also heard of it as a sort of a hook to hang that knowledge on, because you're connecting that new knowledge with that old knowledge. That's a great point. Yeah. And so through your creative method, you're bringing up that existing storage container so that they can connect that new truth. That's good. Doug?
The learning process is, if you only listen, the studies they've done, if you only listen, you only remember such a small percentage of it. The more of your senses or involvement that you have, your whatever, that'll cement those ideas and increase that learning capacity, the remembrance of that.
Right.
As well.
Yeah.
Probably goes along with the hook idea, right? But
you're
the more hooks
connecting
you
with
put on
more
it, the
learning
more
styles.
remembers.
Yep.
I think it also adds to the took portion, right? So there's times where I can go, oh man, I remember where that was in scripture, and I'm not always going to do well in taking that out to tell somebody else to say, hey, here's what. But when I can combine it with, oh, this was the story, and I can kind of put those things together, it gives me something to be kind of influenced by somebody else to take and carry that on to somebody else as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the creative method for me helps kind of combine the storytelling for a future conversation.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yep. Good.
I think too, I love the point that Doug brought up. I think we could get really creative because we are in a tune-out sort of culture. We could creatively create. I think we have a lot of work to do in general, but maybe in the church, in creating space for people to process or sit with something.
Mm-hmm.
We could be countercultural. You could even put time into your lesson for meditating on that truth, or for prayer. For actually, it's not, just not creatively disseminating, but then creative internalization opportunities within the lesson where we're actually processing or listening or taking some time with God, just stopping the lesson. Hey, let's just check in with God right now.
Right.
Creating that space in there.
Yeah. And what I love about that is that you really touched on what I think is one of the chief underlying principles of creative methods. And this is it. So if you write something down, this is, the principle is that people learn best when they discover things themselves. People learn best when they discover things themselves. And as I was thinking about this, there are times where I've been sitting in a classroom, and what the teacher has done through a variety of methods, sometimes it's what they've said more in a lecture style, sometimes it's the questions they've asked, is they've brought me to the point where they didn't connect the dots for me, but they brought me to a point where I connected the dots before they said it. And when that happens, it's like the light goes on. It's like, yes, I understand that verse in a new way, or that principle means this. And it's like all of a sudden, it's not just them passing on this information that they have identified, but it's actually like my brain is connecting the dots because they brought all the pieces together in the room, and it's like, yes, that is true, and I understand it. It's like it's taken shape in my mind. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do in the teaching process as a whole, but especially in our use of creative methods, because is giving people space to think, guiding people's minds to the point where they are connecting those dots and not just receiving what's given to them, because what they discover for themselves is going to be way more powerful, and it's going to stick with them much longer than something that I hand to them. But there are some challenges to that. One of the challenges is it fights our ego. Because there's a piece of me that wants you to see, look at this great insight that I found. Like, wow, Eric really figured out a great thing there. I'm glad he shared it with me. And if I help you to discover that for yourself, I get less of the credit. Like, we don't think that, but it's kind of going on in the background. So we have to give up the ego and say, no, I'm here so that they learn, and it's even better if they discover it for themselves than I do. The second thing that's really hard is it's just hard to do that, because all of our minds work in different ways. And so, but thinking about how can I help these students discover this on their own, rather than me being the one that tells them, it's going to be way more powerful if they say the insightful thing than if I say the insightful thing.
So I think most people have heard the phrase, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still, right? And so part of that, right, is basically shining a light so that they can discover for themselves, right? Because you're not trying to convince them of anything. You're just trying to basically clear away all of the clutter so they can see for themselves.
Yeah. Think about like an Easter egg hunt with small children. I apologize if you're anti-Easter eggs. That's perfectly fair. But if let's say you hide a bunch of eggs or candies or whatever from kids, and it's really lame if you were to go in and be like, "There's one."
Right.
There's one. But instead you say things like, do you think there's one behind the couch? What about, did you check on the shelf? There might be, you might want to check on the shelf. So you're guiding them so that they can discover it. You're not showing it to them. Now there are times where you might need to show, or you show enough, And so, but that's the tension in teaching. And Howard Hendricks calls this the law of education. In fact, I think there's a whole chapter on it in this amazing book I keep trying to plug here. Howard Hendricks says, learning is a discovery process. Truth is always more profitable and productive if you can see it yourself. He also says, and I didn't put it on the slide, but I think it's worth doing anyway. He says, tell the learner nothing and do nothing for him that he can learn or do for himself. John Milton Gregory says, the true function of the teacher is to create the most favorable conditions for self-learning. True teaching is not that which gives knowledge, but that which stimulates pupils to gain it. One might say that he teaches best who teaches least. These guys need to give some thought to the pronouns they choose. But, yes.
I like all this, this discussion and things, and I wonder, I posed the question, if in our culture, because there's so many teachers that are secular and there's so many books and stuff, I wonder if we take for granted the word belief in all of this. Because it's really fascinating how Jesus says through the disciples or the apostles and throughout the whole scriptures, the scriptures say that the will of God.
Because there was not, there was a person who shared a lot, and it was not usually valuable stuff. You know, nobody in this room is like that, by the way. It was a very unique situation. Yeah, I don't want to pour water on it because these are fantastic insights.
I think the other thing about a moderator is it allows room for the Holy Spirit to kind of work with amongst the group. And as Stacey was saying, it gives you time to pause.
Yeah.
Really consider.
Yeah. Well, we will attribute that to the reason that we are so far behind on the material I was hoping to cover today. It's been a very good discussion. But let's keep moving. So, fantastic method is probably, there's a reason it was first on the list of discussion, or of items of creative methods, because it's very usable. You don't have to have a storytelling hat to do it. And when done well, it can bring great value to a class, which is what we've had right here. Many of the things that you said are things that I wouldn't have thought to say, but are fantastic insights. And so, really valuable. A couple other things, introducing tension. You can pose a question that creates that tension. One of them was like the one I did last time about which of these three is most important. You can play the devil's advocate sort of thing. You know, what about this? You know, what do you think about that? Create some tension. Josiah Rock is very good at that. I was saying that's one of his strengths as a teacher.
Without even trying.
You took that a direction I didn't want it to go. He's probably going to watch this video.
It's Josiah, we're just
In a
teasing.
good way. Josiah is great. Yeah, exactly. So, listen and affirm. This is a huge thing about moderators. Like, you're going to get comments that are not great. Find something to affirm. But doing that well is a skill of a good moderator. Discussion takes time. That's why we didn't get to all the stuff that I had in my notes today. Because it takes time, but it's good. It's good time. And prepare your questions well, because good questions are key, and poor discussions facilitate poor questions make for poor discussions. So, good. Another creative method, we talked about this a little bit, is multimedia, and I think we can move through this somewhat quickly. What are some of the examples of using media in a lesson?
PowerPoint.
What? PowerPoint, yes. What are some ways to do PowerPoint well and not do PowerPoint well?
This one's one, done well.
Gold star.
Do not read every word off of the PowerPoint.
Yes. Putting everything on the PowerPoint is not helpful. And then read it. It's like, you know, so yeah, that's a good point. You want to kind of have that balance where there's enough there to highlight those key ideas that you want people to remember. PowerPoint brings a visual element. I'm a visual learner. Like if you, need me to write you a check and you tell me the number versus show me the number. Like my mom would say, she goes to the grocery store and if she writes a check, which I don't even know if you can do that anymore, but for her, she needs to see the number on the thing as opposed to just being told that's $27.49 because it just makes it, and I'm very much that way too. The visual helps a lot.
I think with multimedia, I think it can be very engaging, but I think you can also have it where it's over engaging. Mm-hmm. So if you tend to be somewhat dry, and you have a really exciting video or something you're showing, right? The contrast can be like, okay, now we gotta listen to this. Now we're gonna go to sleep. You know, so whatever, if you're playing a movie clip or whatever. So, but I do think people are visual learners, so having pictures and, you know, drawings or things that kind of capture people's minds can be excellent.
Yep. Yeah, it's just like you said, like we talked about before, that you want the the creative method to serve the teaching. What about video? So we talked about PowerPoints, how not to do PowerPoints. What about video clips? You mentioned video clips. How could a video clip be used well? You talked about how it could be distracting or provide too much of a contrast with the teaching.
Sometimes it can really illustrate the point that you're making. I once saw they showed a video clip from Les Miserables at the very beginning where the guy has robbed the priest, the cops bring him back, and he says, "Oh, you forgot the candlesticks."
Yeah.
And the whole point was how great it was His grace, how great is God's grace towards us.
Yeah, it can introduce a story element, it can be engaging, certainly it's visual.
Brings an emotion.
Brings an emotion, yep. I'm a fan of using them appropriately.
So you have to sort of use, like if you're going to use a video clip, it's got to be short. There might be a really good point to make, but if it takes 3 minutes for you to watch through the clip, you're going to lose people.
Yeah. And there have been times where I wanted to use a video clip and I came to the conclusion that it actually was better to still use that same illustration but tell the story.
Yeah.
Because the clip wasn't quite right for what the context was. When I did youth ministry, I would use a video clip even if the connection wasn't so great, because it brought that value of engagement and visual. With a sermon, I want to make sure that it serves the purpose really well. So I did bring a video clip to share with you. Whiteboard, what does whiteboard, I'll play the video clip in a minute. What does whiteboard do for you?
Test your spelling.
Yes?
It's a humility
Yep.
checker there.
Yep.
I just heard about a research study where they actually did research that if you write it on the board versus just say it, people will, their notes and their remembrance were much more accurate. Like 90%.
Yeah.
Very drastic.
Yeah, there's a big part of that is the visual element. Like, I was in art class a few weeks ago, and Kyle Restula drew some stuff on the board, and it's like I can see those pictures in my mind to a certain degree. And so, engage in that technology, emphasize, highlight certain things. It makes the discussion a little bit more concrete.
It gives the note takers a chance to catch up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Well, and it also gives the visual learners now something to capture,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're saying all the similar things, but really it's just complimenting all the different learning styles, right?
Right.
So here, you talk about seeing it, some people need to do it.
Right, which is where handouts come in. The doing, you're actually writing it down. Like my wife will write stuff down. She'll never look back at the notes sometimes. I mean, she'll say that. She will sometimes take the notes and then throw them away when we get home. But it's the act of writing it down that's helpful. Other forms of actually doing, if you can make it happen in a class, can be really valuable as well, but it's harder, especially in a Sunday morning class. So there's more we can talk about here, and there's actually several other methods, and we'll just try to get to them next week. But would you like to see the
DPS?
Okay, so one of the things I say is always test your technology. I tested in my office. I don't know if I didn't test it in here, so let's see here. Oops. This is why I need to test your tech. I thought it would play automatically, because it did in my office.
I assume you did that on purpose, though.
Yes.
It's a demonstration.
Was it
Exactly.
Were you in presentation mode in your office?
No.
I think that's probably why.
That's probably why. So I'm not sure, because I'm even clicking the mouse thing right here on the, but it just advances the slide, so I'm not sure. Maybe I can get it. Oh, let's try that.
Here we go.
Boom.
Why do I stand up here? Anybody? Feel taller. No. Thank you for playing, Mr. Dalton. I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in a different way. See, the world looks very different from up here. You don't believe me? Come see for yourselves. Come on. Come on. Just when you think you know something, you have to look at it in another way. Even though it may seem silly or wrong, you must try. Now, when you read, don't just consider what the author thinks. Consider what you think. Boys, you must strive to find your own voice. Because the longer you wait to begin, the less likely you are to find it at all. Thoreau said most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Don't be resigned to that. Break out. Don't just walk off the edge like lemmings. Look around you. There you go, Mr. Christie. Thank you. Yes. Dare to strike out and find new ground.
There we go. So, creative. I don't know if this is kind of distracting. It's a creative method within a creative method. There's a video clip about a creative method. Look at that! Bang! So, but yeah, you can see, number one, it was engaging for you to see a video clip. Would have been more engaging if we were out of time. But even just the creative method that he demonstrated in his class, getting them to do something and challenge their thinking, it's worth it to have some creativity in your teaching. We'll talk some more next week about some other creative methods that we can use. But a great discussion today. Thank you so much for your input about discussion. Great discussion about discussion. Again, a double whammy. So thank you so much. Thanks for the extra time, and we'll see you next week. Be sure to grab a cookie or something.